thanks to Paul Berger, our host for tonight. Our subject, of course, is Parashas Vayishlach, a fascinating and eventful Parasha, very familiar storyline as well. And I hope we'll have a chance tonight to explore together a few aspects of it. Again, just in case there's anyone here for the first time, my friend for the year is Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, and we have since Bereshis I have been enjoying, I hope you have also found rewarding his creative insights and his particular style. And actually, I was asked to begin this year today with a few reflections on identifying the nature of his style. It is a little bit eclectic, but certainly there are some characteristic features as well. And the main gift of Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz is in terms of drash. But his drash is not generally of the sort of Hasidic or the Kabbalistic sort, although he is actually greatly venerated by Hasidim, and he does draw on Kabbalistic sources from time to time as well. But his sort of niche is drash that merges, that synthesizes the parshanut with the halachic structure. So he will apply halachic principles, sometimes quite abstruse halachic principles, and use them to illuminate or to reveal a facet of the narrative. So in our Parasha Vayishlach, so happens there is a mitzvah of Gid Hanasha, but until now we've had no mitzvahs, maybe Pru Uruvu, but for the most part, Bereshis does not have any mitzvahs, 3 only altogether in the whole book of Bereshis. And nevertheless, he finds frequently, and he illuminates the text in a novel way by recourse to halachic principles. He does it in a way which, as I say, is derech drush, has a homiletic component. But even in his halachic studies, he was a master of pilpul, and he's admired, and his sort of prominence, his eminence lies in the fact that his drashos have a kind of intellectual underpinning to them. They're not just fanciful entirely, even though they're often very creative, and certainly they're not always intended to be, halachically definitive. Nevertheless, I would say that is his approach. His most famous work, which you may have seen quoted, or you may have read it even, is Yaros Dvash, a honeycomb. And that is a collection of drashos which extend for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages. Of course, what we're doing is his commentary on the Torah, although he does sometimes indulge in more extended pieces, which I normally don't incorporate into our shiur. But these are shorter pieces for the most part. But again, the style still comes through. So those are just some general reflections, and we hopefully will see some examples of what I'm describing in our discussion tonight as well. So I want to start with one of the very famous comments of Rashi. The Parsha begins, I hope you have a Chumash with you, with Rashi as well. And that is the beginning of, it's the beginning of our Parsha. As I said, it's chapter 32, verse 4. Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav el Esav achiv arza seir sedei Edom. Yaakov sent messengers ahead. Malachim here probably means messengers al derech hapshat, although Rashi says these were actual malachim. And I've written up my notes for Shabbos Torah reading as well, and on Shabbos we'll speak about an aspect of that also, but that's not for tonight. Vayitzavosam lemor, and he said to them, he instructed them as follows: this is what you should say to Esav, Ko amar avdecha Yaakov, im Lavan garti, Veichar ad ata. I lived with Lavan and I have delayed until now, meaning I'm finally coming home after all these years. I'm coming home, and I've been with Lavan in the interim. That's what he says. That's the message he sends to Esav. So as I said, this is a very famous comment of Rashi. The pasuk says im Lavan garti, and Rashi says v'taryag mitzvos shamarti. I lived with Lavan, I sojourned with Lavan, and I kept the taryag mitzvos. And the implication is that because I kept the mitzvah, so don't think that the time for the fulfillment of our Father's blessing to you, namely that when Yaakov casts off the yoke of the Torah, that will be your cue that you can overcome him and you can subjugate him. Don't think that has happened, even though I've been in the company of Lavan, that nefarious um, scoundrel, but he has not influenced me. And Lolamaditi mimasav, I did not learn from his wicked ways. By the way, on Shabbos in the Dvar Torah after davening, separately from what I alluded to a moment ago, we're going to have a Dvar Torah on the subject of sojourning, not learning. And that's what Yaakov says, but that's a different drash, and we'll do that at that time. But what I want to share with you now is a beautiful interpretation of Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz. He says that in Lavan Garti, I live with Lavan. Why does Esav care where he lived? Why does Yaakov want to tell him where he lived? What's the point? What's the value of it? This is a diplomatic communique. Every word is measured and has a function, has a purpose. Why even bother to say where he's been? What's the difference? Where he's been. So he says something very, Ravina Sahib says something very clever, and I think it's not far from the pshat, because if you take a look, turn back please to chapter 27, verse 36. In Perek Chaf Zayin, Pasuk Lamed Vav, it's towards the end of Toldos. Esav is greatly aggrieved because Yaakov has outwitted him, and Yaakov, has received the blessings that Yitzhak had intended to give to Esav. And Esav says the following kind of sardonic remark. Vayomer, Hachi kara shmo Yaakov. It's very apt that his name is Yaakov, v'ya'akveni zefa amayim, and he has now deceived me twice. The word v'yakveni is to work around me. He's sort of outmaneuvered me twice. He took my bechora and he took my blessings, and he's very upset. Esau was very upset, and he, as I said, reflects that the fact that his brother is called Yaakov is very apt, because the word Yaakov means to be devious. It means from the word akev. Akev is a heel. The heel bends. The heel is that which represents the bottom of the foot, and it is not straight. A person has legs which are straight, and his foot is at a right angle to his leg. The heel is that part of the body which merges the leg with the foot, and it is curved. It it twists or it turns. That's vayakveni zepamayim. Says Yaakov, don't think that my ability and the fact that I'm endowed with that maybe clever or even devious capacity, it's not in order to harm you, it's in order to survive with Lavan. That's why he says in Lavan Garti, because Lavan is Ha'arami, Lavan Ha'arami. Arami has the letters of Ramai. Ramai means someone who is deceptive. And Lavan is the one who sought to deceive Yaakov repeatedly. Of course, he did deceive him with regard to the wives. He promised him Rachel and he gave him Leah. But subsequently as well, he switched his wages repeatedly. So Lavan is the one who sought to destroy Yaakov, to exploit him. So Yaakov says, "Im Lavan Garti, because I live with Lavan, that's why I have to be so guileful, because that's the only way that I can survive with him. So it's not to do you harm. So don't reflect that my name is Yaakov for that reason. I've been living with Lavan for 22 years. How do you think I survived? Only by being able to contend with his guileful ways, and I had to be very alert and very nimble in order to survive." Then he says something else as well. Very, again, I think not far from the pshat. In Lavan Garti, why use the word Garti? Okay, Rashi is also concerned with that, and that's why he gives this drash for Taryag Mitzvah Shamarti, because Garti has the same letters as Taryag. It's Gematria 613, so it hints to the mitzvahs which I kept, even though I was with Lavan. But there's another possibility as well, because at the end of the day, Rashi's comment is a drash. Garti means I lived or I sojourned. Taryag, the fact that it has gematria Taryag, is just a hint. He says something, I think, very astute. He says, why actually does Yaakov say that I was a ger, I was a newcomer. I was there as an alien. I was not native there. I lived there for all of those years, and in Lavan Garti, I never settled down there. Actually, Yaakov should have felt quite at home in Haran. Why? Because Abraham lived in Haran. Rivka, his mother, is from Haran. So it is his homeland. Okay, he wasn't born there, but that's Eretz Avoseinu. So why does he say, yes, I was a sojourner, I was in a foreign land, I was a stranger in a strange land, and I was out of sorts, and I was unfamiliar, and I was a newcomer, and I was marginalized, and all of that? Hey, it's his familial heritage, Haran. So he observes that actually Abraham said in Parshas Chayei Sarah, Abraham said, "Ha'elokim, the God, Shilakachani mibeis avi, who took me from my father's house, ume eretz moladati, and from my homeland, he will look after you, Eliezer." He's talking to a servant, and he will ensure that you find. And if not, don't take my son back there. That is to say, Hashem, who caused me to leave Mesopotamia and come to this land, uh, that's where my destiny lies. So don't take my son and bring him back to Mesopotamia. If she, the girl, declines to come here, then the deal is off. That's the context of it. Says Rashi, Halokim shelakachani mibeis avi, Rashi says, is Haran. Umi eretz moladati is Ur Kasdim. Okay, those are two places. They're not identical. If you take a look at the early career of Avraham, before Lech Lecha Me'artzecha, at the very end of Parshas Noach, the Torah says that Terach, the father of Avraham, set out from Ur Kasdim to Haran. Evidently, he himself was also on his way to Canaan, but it didn't happen. He stayed. Terach stayed in Haran, and Avraham was summoned to continue the journey with Sarah, etc., to the land of Canaan, which means that Terach actually was not native to Haran. Terach was native to Ur Kasdim. He went to Haran and he stayed in Haran and he died in Haran. How did Lavan get to Haran? Well, Lavan is a cousin. He's from the same family. Lavan was also a ger in Haran. Lavan also did not have deep roots there. So says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, Im Lavan Garti, says Yaakov, I went to live with our relatives, and they also were not veteran settlers. They also were not native to that land. Okay, Lavan maybe was born there, but his parents came from the old country, which is Ur Kasdim. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, therefore, what Yaakov meant to say was, I was a stranger, I was a ger, I was living among our family, Lavan, but he also is a newcomer there. He also doesn't have deep roots there. And in that way, I fulfilled the prophecy that Hashem said to Abraham, Ki ger yezarecha be'eretz Elohem, your descendants will be strangers in a strange land. Yaakov felt that my experience in Haran was already a fulfillment of that prophecy. Therefore, he says to Esav, don't think that you have a valid claim against me, because after all, Hashem said to Abraham that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land. That's me. I experienced that. I fulfilled that. I was a stranger among strangers. And he further adds one last interesting flourish. He adds, is that something similar happened when the Jews did go to Mitzrayim, when Yaakov and his family and his descendants did end up in Egypt, and the Jews actually were subjugated there. But before the descendants of Yaakov were enslaved in Egypt, Yosef had already repositioned the people of Mitzrayim. He had like caused like a population, not so much population exchange, but internal exile. If you look at the end of in Parshas Vayichi, we have that description. Actually, at the end of Parshas Vayigash, we have that description how because of the famine, the people had to move. They sold their land and they relocated, and therefore even the Jewish people, when they also were not native to Egypt, but they were among Egyptians who had been displaced as well. So that the experience of the exile of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim was somewhat vitiated. It was diminished. The, the pain was diminished because the Egyptians also had been relocated from where they were. And this is a kind of masa avos simin labanim that is his insight, which I think is very clever, that Yaakov with Lavan also fulfilled something quite similar. This is anticipating the experience of the Jewish people generations later in Egypt. Yaakov already had it, where he was a ger among gerim, because even Lavan was not really native to Haran, even if he was born there, but the family had only recently arrived, as we have seen, as the Torah itself says about Terach, who left Ur Kasdim and he went to Haran, and Abraham therefore was not native to Haran, and for that reason, again, it was new country for Yaakov, meaning it wasn't his ancestral roots going back many generations. I would just like to add my own thought. That is that I'm sure all of you know, and anyone who doesn't know can tell from my accent after 30 years in Britain, I still have an American accent. Yeah, I'm an American. And America, you probably know, is a nation of immigrants. The United States of America is a nation of immigrants. And I think that is part of why the Jewish people have flourished extraordinarily in the USA. Because, yes, we were we were all immigrants. Most American Jews today are descended from those who came to Ellis Island, actually, between 1881 and 1914, and my ancestors among them. And we came to our ancestors not that long ago, 100 years ago, approximately, a bit more, came to a country where so many of the Americans were themselves descended from immigrants as well, including Donald Trump, actually, also. I mean, I think his grandfather came from Scotland. So I'm not being facetious, because the fact that America is a nation of immigrants made it easier for Jewish immigrants as well as others to succeed and to flourish there. But I don't want to get political, so let's go on to my next thought, which is a very beautiful pasuk, beautiful for the reasons that you'll soon see why I consider it beautiful, because of its historical implications, and that is verse 9. So just turn further a few verses to pasuk tes. Vayomer. So Yaakov is very afraid because he's gotten the message from his emissaries. The message comes back. Esav is indeed coming to meet you, or better, to confront you with 400 ruffians. Yaakov is mortified by the thought, and he plans his strategy. And one strategy which he introduces, which he implements, is that he'll divide his camp into two, a military strategy. If Esav comes and strikes one camp, so the other camp will escape. And Rashi says something quite interesting. If you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says al korcho. Esav may want to destroy me entirely, but he won't succeed. By implementing this strategy, I will ensure that although he may strike one camp, the other one will survive. Because I'm going to fight with him. So Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz asks very simply, how does Yaakov know that Al Korcho, or how does Rashi know Al Korcho, that definitely the second camp will have to survive? Maybe Esau will destroy one camp and then the second camp. After all, the camp is only half a camp. So if Yaakov's entire entourage, or let's say army, probably militia, impromptu army, cannot prevail against Esav, if he divides his camp into two halves, well, if Esav can strike the whole camp, he'll definitely strike half a camp and then the other half a camp. This military strategy actually could be seen as very folly. If you're worried about your enemy's strength, then don't have your strength and say, well, we'll just fight them with half of our army and then the other half of the army. The Medrash says that these two camps were separated by one day's journey. What's the significance of the day's journey that separated the two camps? Again, brilliant and sort of unconventional observation in part of Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz. Rivka said in the Parshas Toldos, Rivka, in trying to uh, persuade or to um, indicate to her husband why Yaakov needs to flee because Esav has designs against him. So Rivka said that she said, Lama eshkal shneichem yom echad. Why should I lose both of you on one day? Meaning that if Esau kills Yaakov, then, or then Yaakov's followers or supporters will then kill Esau. It'll be a bloodbath, and I'm going to lose potentially both of my sons on one day. It was probably al derech hapshat at the simple level, just a kind of poetic turn of phrase or maybe an exaggeration. However, Rashi says that the spirit, the prophetic spirit, was in her mouth, maybe without realizing it, and indeed they were destined to die on the same day. In fact, they would die on the same day. Actually, not exactly die on the same day, but they would be buried on the same day. Because Yaakov died in Egypt, they mummified him, but eventually when they took him to the Maras HaMachpelah, according to our tradition, Esav died on the same day that Yaakov was buried. Presumably they buried Esav on that day as well. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, Yaakov knew about this. He knew that on the day that Yaakov dies, Esav will also die. So therefore, by separating the camps by one day, and of course, Yaakov was in the first camp because it says, "V'hu over lifneihem," he went ahead of them. That is to say, Yaakov was in the first group. So if Esav attacks Yaakov and he kills Yaakov, the second camp will definitely survive. Why? Because Esav will not be able to overtake the second camp in order to attack it, because Esav is going to die on the same day that Yaakov dies. So if the camps are nearby, 6 hours apart, he'll kill one in the morning, he'll kill the other one in the afternoon. But if they are full day's journey apart, even if he kills Yaakov in the morning, he won't be able to reach the other camp by the end of the day before Esav also will die. Whether he dies of his wounds or dies of natural means or dies of serpent bite, whatever it might be, he was destined to die on the day that Yaakov dies. So therefore Yaakov said, by dividing my camp in two, I know that for certain some of us will survive. Even if I, Yaakov, perish, but my progeny in the other camp will certainly live to fight another day. Now, the reason that I like this pasuk very much is because of what Ramban says. I had it here before. I should put it away. Time is getting a bit short, so I'll just tell you. Ramban says that this formula, V'haya hamachaneh hanishar lifleita, the second camp will survive, characterizes Jewish history, says Ramban, that with regards to our contending or our persecution at the hands of Rome. Of course, Rome is Edom, is associated with Esav. This has been our experience, that when the kings of Edom, when the Roman emperor or empire or components within it oppress us and decree against our wealth or our financial wherewithal, or against our religion, or against our very survival in one place, in another country, in another province, there's another king, there's another governor who allows us to escape there. And this has been the pattern of Jewish history. We could explain it more fully and many other examples of that, but we find again and again that where Jewish life, it becomes intolerable sometimes in one place, but there's another place in the world where we are able to survive. And actually, although Ramban lived long before the Spanish expulsion, when the Jews were expelled, he lived in Spain, but before the expulsion. But when the Jews were expelled in 1492, so the Ottoman emperor welcomed them, the Sultan emperor welcomed them. When Ruthie and I were in Istanbul a few years ago, we visited the Jewish Museum, and there they make much of this comment attributed to the Sultan at the time about Ferdinand and Isabella. He says, they say that these are very wise people, he says, but they're fools because they impoverish their empire and they enrich mine by driving out the Jews. And this has repeated itself many times throughout our history. So this is Hayah HaMachane Nisha Liflita. Take a look at what Ramban says, but that is just by the by. We have only a few minutes left, so I'd like to move on to the next pasuk. For those who pay attention, I don't know how many people do pay attention to Ruthie's promotion of my shiur. So it was called tonight Yaakov's late night struggle, and this is one of the intriguing and in some ways perplexing passages in the Torah. Yaakov is set upon by an anonymous assailant, and you'll find this in chapter 32, pasuk Chaf Hey. Perek Lamed Beis, pasuk Chaf Hey. Vayivaser Yaakov levado. So Yaakov has taken his family across the Nahar Yabok, and Yaakov goes back to the other side, and he's left alone. Vayavek ish imo. A man wrestles with him ad alos hashachar, until dawn. So, excuse me, as we know, this most of the commentaries say that this assailant was not just a common garden variety thug or mugger, but rather he was an angel. He was a malach chavala, like a hostile angel. And in fact, he was Saroshel Esav. He was the guardian angel of Esav himself. Just parenthetically, according to Rambam, Maimonides, actually, this was all a dream. This was all a vivid dream on the part of Yaakov. And he beheld this, maybe reflecting his brooding fear of his confrontation with Esav the next day. But at any rate, the expression vayavek requires an explanation. Vayavek ish imo. So if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi quotes Menachem ben Saruk. Menachem pirish vayis afar ish. Lashon avak shahayu ma'alim afar baraglehem al yedei na'anuam. The word vayavek comes to the word avak. Avak means dust. Two people who are wrestling vigorously and, a fight to the finish, so they stir up a lot of dust. If you've ever watched a Western, I'm sure none of the very learned people here have ever done such a thing. I told you I'm an American, so when I was growing up, sometimes we used to watch Westerns. I say it in its soft voice, but anyway, they always have, the Dust Bowl, that's the Great Plains, dust when their people are fighting. Okay, vayavek ish imo. That's what Rashi says. Al derech hapshat, he has another possibility as well that Rashi suggests. But it is evident that they are fighting because he sees that he cannot destroy Yaakov. He injures him instead. Says Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz, a beautiful drash. Vayavek, this adversary, this celestial enemy of Yaakov, this eternal antagonist of Yaakov, of course, is the Satan, who is looking for a basis upon which to destroy Yaakov. He's looking for some hate, for some aveira. What has Yaakov done wrong? What are his failings? Where is his spiritual weakness and vulnerability so that I can destroy him? He couldn't find any aveira, but avak, dust. We find in the Talmud the expression avak lashon hara, or avak gezela. Avak means the dust of lashon hara. So certain statements may be ambiguous. You can say about another person, okay, in the Talmudic example, go to this particular house. If you're hungry, they're always eating a lot of food there. They've always got food on the stove, or something like that. So it could be a compliment to say they're very hospitable, but it could be a way of saying they're gluttonous. They're eating all the time. That's could be avak lashon hara. It's a statement which may be ambiguous or ambivalent, but one should avoid it because it's akin to lashon hara. Avak, the dust. So he says that Vayavek Ishimo, he couldn't find any outright transgression, but he was looking for Avak. Aver will tell you in a little while what he found. But why does it say that this happened at night? So most of the Mefarshim explain at night, firstly, that's when Yaakov was vulnerable because he's at night. He couldn't see this mugger approaching him, for example. Of course, the night is a symbol of exile, adalos hashachar, until dawn. I have Rashi's comments that he was an angel who needed to sing praise to Hashem at dawn. Rabbi Yonatan has a lot to say about that as well. But I want to share with you what he says about the symbolism of the night. He says the night is a time for Aveira. The day is a time for mitzvah. The day is associated with the mitzvahs aseh, with the positive commandments. The day is a time for action. That's why Ramach is 248 mitzvahs aseh, positive commandments, has the letters of machar. Machar, tomorrow, now is night. Tomorrow will be daytime. Tomorrow is the day. So Ramach is associated with the positive commandments. The night is a time for transgressions. Most averas, most mitzvahs have to be done during the day. Most averas are done at night. If you think about many forms of immorality, it's associated with the night. The lady of the night is busy at night. An assailant, a mugger, a burglar, these are all at night by stealth. When a person's activities are hidden from public view, that symbolically happens at night. So he was looking for averas, excuse me, for Yaakov, and that's why he wrestled with him throughout the night. But by the time it came morning, he despaired, because if he couldn't find an Avera in Yaakov at night, he's not going to find one in the morning. So that's why Adalos HaShachar, when the sun began to rise, he checked out. But he did damage Yaakov. He managed to injure him. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, the Avak Avera that he found was that Yaakov was afraid. Because when Yaakov heard the news that Esav is approaching, it says, Vayira Yaakov me'od vayetzer lo. Yaakov was very much afraid and he was distressed. This was wrong. Yaakov should not have been afraid, because the pasuk says, Al tira avdi Yaakov. Do not be afraid, my servant Yaakov. Now, actually, that pasuk doesn't appear in the Chumash. It appears in Yeshaya, it appears in Yirmiyah. Actually, 4 times we find that pasuk, Al tira avdi Yaakov. But nevertheless, although Hashem never said it to Yaakov, or at least it's not recorded in the Torah directly, but the Navi says Hashem told him Al tira. So Hashem told Yaakov, don't be afraid. So, and he was afraid. So this is Avak Avera. He mentions also in another piece, just very briefly, that he injured his leg. He was limping because Yaakov maybe did fall short in a certain mitzvah's aseh. There's a particular mitzvah's aseh, a positive commandment which Yaakov neglected, and that is kibud av ve'em. For 22 years, he was in Haran. He could have left for a while and then come back sooner. Or even if he couldn't come back, the fact is he didn't honor his parents during that time. He didn't serve his parents. So that's why he is injured in his leg, because he should have, the leg symbolize like to transport Yaakov. He was far away. He should have used his legs to return to the land of Israel. But on the subject of legs, I want to end. I know we're a bit into overtime already. What Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz says, and here is an example of a halachic, where he draws on halachic principles to illuminate in a beautiful drash manner a pasuk in our parsha. If you take a look at chapter 33, verse 18. So here it says, pasuk, Pasuk Yudches. Perek Lamed Gimel, Pasuk Yudches. Vayavo Yaakov Shalem, after his encounter with Esav, and after he escapes unscathed, unharmed, he makes his way to Shem. Okay, the good times don't last, as we know, but at least the pasuk says, "V'yavo Yaakov Shalem ir Shem." He was whole when he came to the town of Shem, Asher Beretz Canaan, which is in the land of Canaan. By the way, the Torah adds that. B'va'omi Padan Aram, when he came from Padan Aram, that's the same as Haran. Vayichan es penei ha'ir, and he settled. The word Vayichan is like from the word machaneh. Vayichan es penei ha'ir, and he encamped facing the city. So that the city faced him and he faced the city. He didn't encamp, or he didn't settle within the city. That's why it says shortly after, Dinah went into the city to check things out, but that's another story. Here, the Torah says that Yaakov arrived in Shechem Shalem. Rashi says Shalem, he was whole bodily in the physical sense, meaning that he was healed from his injury. What injury? We know what injury. We just said he was injured in his wrestling match with the angel, but he healed. But by the way, it says explicitly, "V'utzoleya al yirecho." He was limping on his leg. Okay, with that in mind, let's explore what Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz says about this. So the Medrash says that he arrived on Erev Shabbos im dimdume chama, late in the afternoon on Erev Shabbos. That's when he arrived to Shechem. And says the Medrash, tikein eruve tchumin. For those Daf Yomi advocates who finished recently Masechta Eruvin. So we learned there about the, hey, yeah, there's one right there I can see, one of our scholars, Daf Yomi boys. Yeah, about Eruv Tchumin. Eruv Tchumin is the mitzvah, or the mechanism by which a person can walk an extended distance on Shabbos by establishing Erev Tchumen. This is not the time to discuss it at length. But in order to do that, you need to measure out 2,000 amot. It's about 2,000 strides. So if you've got the equipment, then you can do it. But if you don't have, and you don't have the time, Yaakov only arrived late in the day, Friday afternoon. He encamped outside the city, but he wanted to go into the town. So he walked 2,000 amot in order to establish how far he can walk on Shabbos. That's Erev Tchumin. Actually, the Medrash says, here is when we see, and the Gemara says that Yaakov, or the patriarchs, kept the mitzvahs, even though they're not yet been given, even mitzvahs Drabbana, such as Eruvin, Erev Tchumin. And here's where we see Erev Tchumin. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, what's the significance that he can? How does Rashi know Shalem Begufo? How do we know Shalem Begufo, that he was healed from his limp? He says the answer is because how can you walk 2,000 strides if you can't stride? If you're limping, then you can't walk 2,000 steps. Or if you do, your steps are going to be shorter or abnormal. So he says that's how Rashi knows Shalem Begufo, that he was physically healed, that he was able to walk, and he was able, return to his normal stride. Therefore, he could count out 2,000 amot for the Tchum Shabbos, and this is how he explains the significance of Yaakov arriving Shalem. And why does it say Be'eretz Canaan? I mean, we know Shechem is in Eretz Canaan. Why does the Torah emphasize it? He says, because like the Ramban tells us, the Avos kept the mitzvahs in the land of Israel. So since he's arrived now back in Eretz Israel, so therefore he has to keep a Tchum Shabbos. He can't get into the town if he's encamped outside it, unless it's within 2,000 amot and certain other things as well. So that's why it says Be'eretz Canaan, Asher Be'eretz Canaan. He came to Shechem Asher Be'eretz Canaan, and in this way he's able to shed light on this pasuk, the nuances of the pasuk. He has illuminated the comment of Rashi Shalem Begufo by, let's say, proving it, or let's at least say validating it, corroborating it by the Midrashic statement that he established Eruve Tchumen. If that's the case, he must have been healed because he has to walk 2,000 amot in order to know what is the distance that one can walk on Shabbos. Okay, we've gone a bit into overtime once again. I'm sorry, but I hope you'll agree. We've seen some interesting and creative interpretations of a fascinating parsha. I've already alluded to the fact that we've got more from Yonatan Eibeschutz and other sources on Shabbos. And now that we're back in business on Shabbos morning at Kesher, for those able to join us, please do so. And we look forward to seeing you then. Shabbat Shalom to one and all. If there are any questions or comments, happy to take them.
Good Shabbos. Thanks.